Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be giving you your fall foliage forecast for 2021. We're going to be first going over your average date of peak fall foliage, so we're going to be talking out when your peak fall foliage typically is, and then whether I think it'll be later or earlier than normal based on the temperature and precipitation patterns that are expected throughout the fall months. Now, just a brief update. This is the third video out of 7 long-range forecasts that I'll be making over this next few days. We had our August forecast 2 days ago as of when this would be uploaded. The fall forecast was issued on the 10th. Today is the fall foliage forecast. The winter forecast is coming out tomorrow, the 12th. The total snowfall forecast will be out on the 13th. The first snowfall forecast will be out on the 14th. And the first frost forecast should be out around the 15th. After that, I'll go back to my regular daily uploads about the current weather events. If you have any questions on any of these videos or any of my videos in general, just leave a comment down below and I'll respond to you guys within a couple of hours of you posting that. So let's start off here and let's talk about the time and the average peak of fall foliage. So this is when you would be dealing with the most vibrant of the colors, and this is when generally your peak fall foliage would be. Now, there are a few exceptions. For example, in parts of the northern plains, or really the entire Great Plains area, we don't have a lot of tree cover. So these areas would only be experiencing that fall foliage in those specific locations where we do have tree covers. For example, some of the Black Hills in South Dakota would be one of the more forested areas of that entire region. Those are the areas where this fall foliage forecast is going to pertain to. So there are some areas which don't have a lot of tree cover, especially in the central U.S. and even into the southeast, where we have more of those tropical trees that don't really see too much fall foliage or change in color. And this isn't going to really pertain to those trees. This is going to be pertaining more to your standard type of trees that do experience foliage from year to year, such as your oak trees, your birch trees, those type of trees, where you're actually going to be seeing some noticeable change in color. So let's start off with the earliest, and you can see in this kind of dark brown area, almost a black color there. This is where we're expecting the peak fall foliage on average to be from October 10th or earlier. And you can see that this spans pretty much the entirety of the Rockies, mainly due to elevation, also for parts of the upper Great Lakes and into the interior Northeast, as well as northern New England. One of the things that can really drive the time of peak is going to be whether you're close to a lake or some sort of body of water. If you're closer to a body of water, you have a higher chance of getting that earlier. So, for example, you might be driving around your town and you notice that most of the trees by, let's say, mid-October are still yellow, while you go near, one of the local lakes or local ponds, and some of the trees are already starting to turn orange or red. That is because of the lake and what it brings to the area. It can help bring up the amount of moisture within that localized area, and the amount of moisture, if it's a little bit of a drier fall, you're going to see less fall foliage. It won't be as vibrant. So when you go near lakes, you have more of that moisture to work with. It can help create more vibrant colors within the trees. So that is going to be one of the things. It will be a localized type of event, but in general, some of the things that are going to drive this are, again, proximity to water and also the elevation. So you can see that in parts of the Rockies, mainly due to elevation and how cold it will be in those areas, you can see that fall foliage a little bit earlier, and actually much earlier than most other areas. If you look at for the 10th through the 20th in this kind of maroon color, this goes from the northeast through the Great Lakes into parts of the northern plains, and then all through the rest of the Rockies and into the northwest. And you can see this basically goes from coast to coast with those with the fall foliage expected between October 10th through 20th. You also see another cutout there for the Sierra Nevada mountains in parts of eastern California and western Nevada. That's also another area that typically experiences their peak fall foliage between the 10th and the 20th. And again, this is just based on averages, so this is in an average year, and again, I'm going to be talking about whether I think it'll be earlier or later depending on where you are. Now, this is the area in this kind of orange shade where I'm expecting it to be, or where the average is between October 20th and October 31st for the peak fall foliage. So this is when the trees would be already turning orange or red. They're right before they're about to fall off the trees. This would be your peak time on average. You can see that goes through the rest of the Intermountain West, up through the Great Plains, and then in a thin line through parts of the lower Great Lakes, the Ohio Valley, and then much of the Mid-Atlantic, and then all the way down the spine of the Appalachians, again, due to elevation, where we're dealing with the average peak of fall foliage between October 20th and October 31st. And again, one of the other contributing factors to when your fall foliage peak will actually be is how much or how cold the temperatures are. So you can see that again further to the north, you go into the Rockies, you go into the upper Great Lakes, you go into the areas like northern New England where it's much colder than the rest of the areas, let's say further to the south. You're going to deal with your fall foliage earlier on because you're getting down into the 50s, the 40s, the 30s, the 20s much earlier than areas, let's say, in the southeast or the southern plains. So it's all about when you're getting into that colder time frame, and that's really going to dictate when you get some of that fall foliage. Also, something that is also going to play a role in that is how much precipitation you get. You can have a really boring fall foliage season if you have a dry pattern. So if you're in a drier than normal pattern, you're going to see most of these trees just go kind of from a dark orange just to kind of brown and then fall off the tree. So they're really not going to have too much color to them. That will be one of the factors into how vibrant the peak fall foliage is going to be. November 1st through 10th in this lighter orange shade, which goes through the southwest into parts of the Great Plains, and then in a thin band through parts of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, all the way to the eastern Tennessee Valley, and then also through parts of the Carolinas, Georgia, and a little bit of Alabama. So this is where you're expecting your average time of peak fall foliage between November 1st and November 10th. So it's getting a little bit later on, but still, a lot of these areas still do get some fairly vibrant foliage, especially when you live into the southeast and let's say eastern Tennessee, eastern Kentucky. These areas can actually get some really nice fall foliage, especially as you get up into the higher elevations of the Appalachians. So you can definitely get some very good fall foliage colors and really good pictures if you go up into that region. If you live further to the north, some good spots to go to would be areas like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. If you live up in the northeast, if you live up in the Great Lakes, you want to go, especially if you want to get them earlier, you want to go up near the UP of Michigan, northern Wisconsin, into northern Minnesota, especially to get some of those good fall foliage pictures. And then if you live in the west, you're going to want to mainly go up into some higher elevation regions, or you're going to want to drive up to the Pacific Northwest. You can get some really good fall foliage colors in those areas. The second area here for kind of this yellowish shade in the mid-south, this is where you expect your average peak fall foliage between November 11th and November 20th. So getting later on in the month of November here, and you can see that hugs along the southwest and then all the way up into parts of the Ozarks. You can then it goes down into parts of the southeast where we have November 11th through 20th being your peak fall foliage time frame. You can get some good pictures, especially if you live near the Ozarks with a little bit of that terrain. It can definitely get very beautiful in those areas with the fall foliage colors. Then in parts of the southeast, especially the coastal southeast and into the Gulf Coast, this is where you experience your fall foliage from November 20th or later, if any fall foliage is actually experienced. A lot of these areas, especially as you live closer to the Gulf Coast, don't really have any of those trees that change color. They more of just fall off the trees without changing colors too much, and that's especially with some of those more tropical trees that you see, especially down in southern Florida and southern Texas, and even as you get into, let's say, areas like Louisiana, Mississippi, southern Arkansas, there isn't really too much change in color. They just fall off the tree for the most part. So you're not really going to see too much in the way of changing colors, but this would be when your peak fall foliage would be, or basically the time right before the leaves fall off the tree. Now, this is when I'm expecting the fall foliage to be, whether it'll be earlier or later. Let's start off with my area that I'm expecting it to be slightly earlier, let's say about 5 to 10 days earlier, or maybe even just a little bit less than that. That's going to be in parts of the Northeast and the Great Lakes where I think it will be earlier than normal. One of the reasons is because I think probably by October, we will be dealing with an above average amount of rainfall, so that should help. And I also think that we will be either near normal with the temperatures, maybe slightly above normal, but I don't think that'll play too big of a role into the fall foliage. I think a bigger player would be the amount of precipitation. That really is going to play a good role. And even if it doesn't make it earlier than normal, even if it's not too noticeable, I think the tree colors will be a lot more vibrant than typical because of that precipitation that is expected. Here's where I'm expecting it to be slightly later. You can see through the west, also into the southeast and the southern plains. This is where we're expecting warmer temperatures for the month of October and then into November for these spots. So I am expecting it slightly later for these areas. For that reason, it looks like these areas will be warmer. And also, if you live along the western United States, especially in the northwest, it looks like October will be a bit of a drier month. So you're not going to be dealing with as much precipitation for that peak fall foliage time frame. If you live in the southwest, the southeast, southern plains, it will be a little bit more active. So maybe the vibrancy of the colors will be there, but I do think it'll be a little bit later. But again, maybe up to 5 days later than normal. Nothing too substantial. If you live in this area for the central Rockies and then into the coastal northwest, this is where I'm expecting it to be fairly later than normal. So I would say probably 5 to 10 days later than normal with your peak fall foliage. One of the reasons, again, it's going to be the warmer temperatures. The reason I put this here is because in parts of Washington, northern Idaho, Montana, they get their average they get their average peak fall foliage around the early part of October. It might still be a little bit chillier in that area. So you might still, by the point that you average your first your peak fall foliage, it might be still a little bit chilly, but I think by the time that these areas are averaging their fall foliage peak, I think it will be probably warmer than normal, and that drier pattern should set in a little bit more, especially if you live along the west coast. So for areas like California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, I think it'll be a little bit drier than normal, so that should help contribute to the slightly later than normal fall foliage times. Although you will definitely still see some change in color, it will probably just be 5-10 days later than what is typical. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Just another reminder, tomorrow is our winter forecast. On the 13th, we have your total snowfall forecast. The 14th is your first snowfall forecast. And the 15th is your first frost forecast. If you have any questions or you want a personal forecast, just leave a comment down below and I'll respond within a couple hours of you posting that. Please consider liking the video, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you never miss another video. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.